Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome to Concordia Church Online.
This message wraps up our series, Jesus the Storyteller. As we've looked at those stories that Jesus has told us, those stories are sharing God's heart with us. And we're seeing that the heart of God's heart is grace. Jesus is telling us that God loves everybody. And he loves everybody so much and wants so much for everybody to be with him that he's patient, that he's gracious, that he's willing to put up with messes in people's lives and in their hearts to give people time to come to know him and get in a relationship with him. But now that we know that, with that as background, we turn to this last set of stories in Matthew chapter 25. And this particular set of stories turns to us and asks us now, how do we live in response to that grace of God? In other words, now that we know God's heart, what happens to our heart? How does our heart change? And how does that make a difference in how we live? I mean, that's important stuff for us to think about. Now that you have faith, how do you live? Now that you have faith, what should you do? Now that you have faith, who should you be? And to get at those answers, Jesus tells 3 stories because he knows that stories are going to stick with us way better than a fill-in-the-blank lecture. The stories are in Matthew chapter 25. Now, sometimes we look at each of those stories individually, and that's a good thing to do, but Jesus told them one after another, kind of as a unit. And that's what we're going to look at, how we're going to look at them today. 3 big rocks that Jesus tells us on, here's how you live right now while you're waiting for Jesus to return. So let's dig in. The first of those stories, Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 1.
Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him!" All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil, because our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back, "Believe me, I don't know you. So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or hour of my return."
So let me give you a little background here. This first story follows pretty much the wedding customs that were in place in Israel in Jesus' time. After getting engaged, the couple was considered legally married, but they lived apart for 9 months or more. And part of what they did during that time was they would prepare for the wedding celebration. And it was pretty normal for guests to have sort of an idea of when the wedding might be coming, but not to actually have the specific date or time. And then the announcement would come, "Hey, everything's ready. Come, now's the time, come to the party." And the groom, accompanied by his attendants, would have a big procession that would come to the bride's house, and then they would take her to the wedding celebration. And that might seem a little weird for us, but that was pretty normal in the day of how they ran the whole wedding celebration thing. And lots of times, here's something else. The weddings were also at night, because you want the wedding to be like a huge party, right? A big celebration. So why at night? Well, remember, this is a time before electricity, and so things at night were really, really dark and really, really quiet. So imagine in that dark and the quiet of the night, if suddenly there's this big procession that starts to come in, and they're singing and there's dancing and there's these torches lighting the night as they're going to the bride's house and then back to the celebration. It would have seemed like New Year's Eve. It would have been a really huge celebration. Now back to Jesus' story. See, in Jesus' story, all 10 of these people were invited. All 10 wanted to go. All 10 made initial preparations to attend. All 10 also fell asleep as they're waiting. And only 5 got in. So if all those things were the same, why did 5 make it into the wedding celebration and 5 were left out in the cold? Well, here's the difference. While everybody slept, apparently the wise ones were the ones who, Jesus says, let me read you a quote again, they kept watch. And not only made sure that lamps were filled, they made sure that they had enough oil on hand so they were ready whenever the bridegroom would come. In other words, they were prepared. Right? And that's the point Jesus is making to us. Be prepared. See, it wasn't enough for them just to have oil. It was a long celebration. If the procession took a long time, those lamps, which are really more like torches, they'd go out. Or if it was the bridegroom was a long time in coming or was delayed, again, they would dry out. And you needed to have extra oil available. Because remember, it's the dark of the night. It's in the dark of the night and there's not any stores to go to. So if you're going to have to make sure you have the oil on hand. And that's Jesus' point. Be prepared. Now there's a couple of steps to be prepared. The first step is have faith. Have faith in Jesus in your heart. Have faith in Jesus in your heart that He loves you and He died for you, that He wants to have a relationship with you. And again, not just know those facts, have it in your heart. Here's a good way to think about that. Is your relationship with God a personal one or a professional one? To be prepared, opt for personal. All right. And so far, so good. All 10 seem to have made that particular preparation. Each one of them had oil in their lamps, and they thought they were ready. But again, only 5 made it. So what happened? What can we learn from that? Well, to be prepared, you also have to keep on preparing, right? If there was a long delay, again, like I told you, those torches could dry out. If the procession took a long time, the torches again could dry out, and the lamps would need to be, oil would need to be replenished. And guess what? The oil wasn't going to replace itself. And the wise ones understood that. And so the wise ones were prepared. They actually had to make a conscious effort to bring extra oil so there was always enough when they needed it. All right, now get the point? 5 thought that the invitation and saying yes to that initial invitation was, well, good enough. And they were sort of coasting into the celebration, which frankly is how a lot of people act after they've been believers for a while. Just kind of coast, figuring that the first yes is going to see you through. But the other 5 didn't want to take any chance, did they? Didn't want to take any chance on missing out on the celebration, so they had made sure that they had plenty of oil available for those dark of the night times. Now, if you look at those, which were wise and which were foolish? The foolish ones were the ones who coasted. The wise ones were the ones who not only prepared, but they kept on preparing. And when's the best time to prepare? When's the best time to prepare? It's not during the night, is it? It's before the night. It's during the day. That's when the wise ones brought their oil. So see, part of being prepared is to keep working at your faith. Keep working at your faith so you're prepared for those long, dark night of the soul times when Satan's trying to extinguish the light of your faith. Maybe like what many of us have been through for the past 18 months. I think that's what Paul meant when he wrote this, Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Let me read it to you. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. What he's saying there is, give your faith a workout. Keep giving your faith a workout. So if you have to choose between passively waiting and passionately pursuing your faith, choose passionately pursuing. All right, to be prepared, keep asking yourself, what am I doing to pursue closeness with God? How much time and effort am I spending in that, and how often? That's how you keep being prepared. And that's the point of Jesus' first story, the first big rock. But there's three of them, and he wants us to see those together. So let's go on in Matthew chapter 25 and listen to the second story beginning at verse 14.
The kingdom of heaven is like a man going on a trip. He called his servants and entrusted some money to them. He gave one man $10,000, another $4,000, and another $2,000. Each was given money based on his ability. Then the man went on his trip. The one who received $10,000 invested the money at once and doubled his money. The one who had $4,000 did the same and also doubled his money. But the one who received $2,000 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The one who received $10,000 brought the additional $10,000. He said, "Sir, you gave me $10,000. I've doubled the amount." His master replied, "Good job. You're a good and faithful servant. You proved that you could be trusted with a small amount. I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and share your master's happiness." The one who received $4,000 came and said, "Sir, you gave me $4,000. I've doubled the amount." His master replied, "Good job. You're a good and faithful servant. You proved that you could be trusted with a small amount. I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and share your master's happiness." Then the one who received $2,000 came and said, "Sir, I knew that you are a hard person to please. You harvest where you haven't planted and gather where you haven't scattered any seeds. I was afraid, so I hid your $2,000 in the ground. Here's your money." His master responded, "You evil and lazy servant. If you knew that I harvest where I haven't planted and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have invested my money with the bankers. When I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. Take the $2,000 away from him. Give it to the one who has the $10,000. To all who have, more will be given, and they will have more than enough. But everything will be taken away from those who don't have much. Throw this useless servant outside into the darkness. People will cry and be in extreme pain there."
So as you hear that story, what's Jesus' second big point about how we live as we're waiting for him to return? He's saying don't just be prepared, also be productive. Be productive. Now, there's a few things in the details of this story that help us to see the point that Jesus is making here about living out our faith. Here's detail number one, verse 15. He gave one man $10,000, another $4,000, another $2,000. Each was given money based on his ability. I want to zero in on that phrase, based on his ability. Because what Jesus is saying here is that each servant was different. Right? Each servant had different abilities and capabilities. Because of that, the man gives the servants different amounts of money. Why? Well, because he wants them to succeed. Right? He wants them to be productive. He wants them to succeed. He doesn't want them to feel the weight and the burden of something that's like way far beyond them. He knows them. And he knows their capabilities, and he trusts them with an amount of money that he knows that they can handle and get the job done. And you know what I noticed there too? The servants are good with that. There's no comparing or complaining here. It seems that they know their job isn't to compete with each other, It's to produce for their boss. All right, now here's the second detail. Down in verse 16. The one who received $10,000 invested the money at once. So I'm going to zero in at once, and doubled his money. The one who had $4,000 did the same and also doubled his money. And the key phrase there is to put it to work at once, immediately, without delay. He knows what his job is and gets to it. Now, why is that? He doesn't have a job description. He doesn't have a quota. The master doesn't say, produce this much. The servant just knows his job. Why? Because he knows his boss. He knows his boss, and he knows his boss's intent, and he knows his boss's heart, and he feels his boss's trust, right? And he wants to do what his boss wants done. He wants to, again, here's that word produce. He wants to produce the results his boss wants to see. Detail number 3, down at verse 18. But the one who received the $2,000 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Hid his master's money. Right, was this servant reckless? Was he careless? Did he squander the money? Did he steal it? No. He just buried it. Right? And in so doing, he showed that he didn't know the boss's heart. That he didn't know that the boss wanted him to produce. He acted as if he had no gift at all. And see, the very nature of the master's gifts here is that they're to be used to produce. And that's what detail number 4 shows us. Down in verse 26, his master responded, "You evil and lazy servant, if you knew that I harvest where I haven't planted and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have invested my money with the bankers." You should have there literally says it is necessary. All right? It's necessary for you to do something with what you've been given. Absolutely necessary. This last servant didn't squander what the master gave him. He just did nothing. He significantly underutilized the gift, and he expected to escape blame. Well, did he? You get Jesus' point? Be productive. All right, be productive. And he's not talking here about being productive for ourselves. All right, that's actually a side benefit of the gifts and talents and ability and money that God gives us. We get to, as we're using those, they also benefit us. But God gives them to us, not for us, but for use in His service. I mean, if you look at the servants here in the story, they didn't use what they'd been given for themselves, did they? They used it for the master. Right? And that's part of the point that Jesus is making here. Jesus is telling us that He's given us those things. Our time, our talent, our ability, our influence, our money. Jesus is saying He's given them to use for Him. To be productive for Him. To use each of them to be productive in helping God's kingdom to grow. And Jesus is telling us here, see how these go together? He's saying we're not just supposed to prepare by strengthening our own faith. We are. We're supposed to keep on strengthening our own faith, but we're also supposed to be producing for Him. We're also supposed to be using in these days, the time and talent and ability and influence and money that He's given us to help the work of the church and to help get the word out of God's love for us in Jesus. And to be productive, get this, no matter what age you are, no matter how much or how little you've been given, no matter how much talent or ability that you have, no matter how short or how long you've been following Jesus, we be productive, not to earn God's love again, but to show His love to others and to work together with other believers to help His kingdom to grow. That's being productive. And that's also how Jesus wants us to live in these days. That's the first two. But there's also a third big rock that also goes with this. And so Jesus tells us a third story. It starts down at verse 31. Listen.
But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and showed you hospitality, or naked and gave you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and not help you?" And he will answer, "I tell you the truth. When you refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life.
As you heard that story, do you see the third big thing Jesus is trying to tell us about how we live now that we believe? How our heart responds to God being at work in our heart? The first big thing was be prepared. Keep working on strengthening your faith. The second big thing was, as you're doing that, also be productive. Keep on using your time and talents and ability and your money to work for God and to work together with others for God to help His kingdom to grow. Well, the third big thing is also a B, and this is be helpful. Be helpful, especially be helpful to others, and especially helpful to others that Jesus calls the least of these. Now there's, again, a few details in the story that help us to see what Jesus is getting at here. I want you to notice, did you notice how when Jesus calls the ones the righteous, that they weren't even aware of what they were doing for God? Which I think tells you they weren't trying to run up the good works score. If they were doing this to try to get points with God, to run up the good works score, they certainly would have been able to say, "Oh yes, Jesus, we did this and this and this and this. Did you notice?" But that's not what you see here. It's like, "Lord, when did we do this for you?" That's what I'm reading here. When did we do this for you? It seems to me like the righteous understood that heaven was and always is a gift. 100% gift, 100% grace, 100% God's doing, not our action. And so they were being helpful, not because they were trying to earn something from God, right? They were being helpful because their heart had been changed by God. Let me say that again. They were being helpful because their heart had been changed by God. And they were responding to God's love that was continuing to be at work in their heart. And they were beginning to more naturally and consistently and habitually live and love like Jesus in the world, helping others. Even the least of these isn't going to make God love you any more than He already does. But it is evidence that your heart has been changed and moved by God, and it's starting to beat like His. Now, let me ask you something. If you're not doing this to make God love you more, why are you doing it? If it's costly, if it's time-consuming, if it's sometimes inconvenient, why are you helping others if it's not to get something from God? Here's why. You help others because you love God and you're living out your faith. Right? You help others because the love of God is at work in you. You help others because you love God personally and passionately, not just professionally. You help others because you start to have God's passions becoming your passions. You help others because you start to view people and things the way God does. And you know what? A pretty consistent theme of the Bible is that God is on the side of the hurting and the helpless and those who can't speak for themselves. And it also tells us pretty consistently that God used believers as his hands and his feet in this world, both to do good and to show other people what God is like. And you know what happens when we live and love like Jesus did? We help other people see Jesus. We really do. And that's why Jesus says, be helpful. Be helpful because people need your help. And be helpful because people need to see me. So if you see a need and God has given you the ability to help, well, help. Don't worry about judging the merit. Just help, period, where you can, in the best way you can, especially among the ones that God calls the least of these. Again, not to earn God's love, but to show God's love. And those are the three big rocks of living out your faith right now. No matter what age you are, no matter how long you've believed, be prepared. Right? Keep working at growing and strengthening your faith. Be productive. Keep working with others, using your time and talents and ability and your money to help God's kingdom to grow. And be helpful, especially to those that Jesus calls the least of these. How you doing? How you doing? And what can you keep doing or start doing to do a little better?